Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for coming to today's lecture sponsored by the Coleman P. Burke Center for Environmental Law. We are about to celebrate our 5th anniversary. The Coleman Burke Center was established in 2019 with the very generous gift. It was established by a very generous gift by the late Coley Burke, who was one of our alums and who endowed the center, allows for programs like this, as well as other things that we do in the environmental space. So again, thank you for coming and being part of our programs. Videos of our various programs are archived on our website, and certainly look for announcements of some other upcoming exciting conferences that we will be sponsoring. Today, it's really a pleasure and an honor to be able to host our speaker, Professor Robert Verchick, to talk about his book, The Octopus in the Parking Garage, and the call for climate resilience. Robert is the Gautier St. Martin Eminent Scholar and Chair in Environmental Law at Loyola University, New Orleans. He's also the 2023-24 Francis B. Cashin Fellow at the Harvard Radcliffe Institute. He served in the Obama administration in 2009 and 2010 as the Deputy Associate Administrator for Policy at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. He has a podcast, Connect the Dots, which is in its 8th season, which I find to be remarkable and cool. So check that out. He's president of the board of the Center for Progressive Reform and is the author of The Octopus in the Parking Garage, a call for climate resilience, which is a 2023 Choice Award for Outstanding Academic Title. I hope, like me, when you heard this title, you kind of scratched your head, depending on how much you know about octopi. Certainly, you're aware that we don't think of them as belonging in parking garages. And the lesson about how that can relate to climate change and what we do about it is certainly a fascinating one. But anyway, you didn't come here to hear me. Some of you hear too much of me as it is. You came here to hear Professor Verchick, so without any further ado, I am pleased to turn over the podium to him. So, welcome.
Thanks a lot. It's great to see everybody today. Climate effects are everywhere, right? And it's not hard to imagine any place where you might find them. I want you, though, to imagine for just a minute that you live not here where it's really cold right now, but pretend you live in Miami Beach, all right, in one of those nice condominium complexes right on Biscayne Bay, and pretend that you are a real estate agent named Richard Conlon. And back in 2016, in November, when there was a super moon and some high tides and some other things going on, he got up in the morning, you got up in the morning, going into the garage, which looks a little bit like that from the inside, and you're going in to get your car. And it's really dark and it's kind of flickering with the green fluorescent light going on, and you put your foot down on the pavement and your foot sinks into water and you hear a little plink, 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 and then you hear a little flop, 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 and you rub your eyes, and this is what you see, right? A giant octopus, about the size of 2 large pizzas, right? And if you are like me, you would do what Richard Conlon did. You grab your phone, you take a bunch of pictures, and you put it on the internet and Facebook and so on. And everybody was chatting about this for a number of actually still years. Now, here's the thing. It's a climate change story. How did the octopus get in the parking garage? Well, that parking garage is above ground by Biscayne Bay. It has storm pipes that go all the way down to the bay, and they're designed to sit above the water so all of the water from the rain can go out into Biscayne Bay. Well, that water line is now higher and higher and higher. And in fact, it's higher than a lot of downspouts. these days. And so when water flushes in because of tides, this is all because of sea level rise and a lot of other kinds of things, the water goes the other way and cephalopods get burped out into the garage. So what's the cephalopod doing down there? It's eating, because all of the algae and fluids that come from the storm drain are really good for them, right? So anyway, they think so. So they got this critter out. Richard Conlon called security. They came in with a bucket, got it back in, and as far as we know, everything's just fine. Now, imagine you are me, right? A law professor who's been working in this area for like 35 years. I went through Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. We don't have to talk about that now. So the first thing I do when I enter a crisis is I write an op-ed. And so my friend Dan Farber and I, we got together, we were talking about this, like, we got to write an op-ed about this. This is climate change. And so we did, and Miami Herald published it, and we said it's an 8-armed alarm bell for climate science. And if we don't know how to keep sea life out of our garages, what else don't we know how to do, right? And that's what got me thinking more and more. And eventually, because I'm a dog with a bone, I said, I'm going to take my op-ed and turn it into a book. And so for several years, what I did is start thinking, talking to people, and trying to figure out what I'm going to tell you today. What is it that climate change is challenging in our lives, right? What is that threat all about? What are people, real people today, doing things? What kinds of things are they doing that are actually helping to protect us and prepare for climate change? And some of those things you can help with. And then how does the law act in a central way to help us wrap our arms around this problem? That's what we're going to try to do today. We know, as I said, that these examples are all around us. And this summer, all I did was talk to reporters because there were wildfires going on, deadly wildfires. And I know there's a big rebuilding effort in Hawaii, for instance. Heat waves all over the country, 200 million Americans in heat alerts during the summertime. Hottest summer, of course, on historical record. Floods from Cathedral City to Charleston, South Carolina. Mudslides too. And there was all this ocean heat off the coast of Florida where I was telling you about. Jacuzzi temperatures. I mean, over 100 degrees in the seawater, right? And so we're going to talk a little bit about that too, right? What the problem in that area is. So all in all, just this summer, more than half of all Americans experienced some kind of extreme weather last summer. And things are just getting drier and wetter and hotter and weirder. And so we're going to have to talk a little bit about that. One theme, right, because we're in a law school, I got a theme for law, is that law is essentially a conservative thing with a small c. Law tries to build stability into society. Law tries to live up to people's expectations. Law tries to stabilize things so that they will be the way that we expect. But climate is now different from that, right? And so what do we do when we have a cultural and a social system that's designed to keep things the way they are, and we have a physical world that's designed to break out of the box, right? And so that really is one of the central issues. We now live in what some scientists call a no analog future, right? And what that means is that that line of temperature that we can observe and extrapolate from using computer models is going way up high. And what we already know from experience, what our law knows and is based on, is going down in that little straight line bumbling along. And so there has to be some way to try to pull those things together. If we don't, we're going to lose a lot of stuff. So we have at least $3 trillion worth of assets that are under threat right now on account of sea level rise, just sea level rise alone. Down in the Gulf, where I've been doing a lot of work on this, is clearly over $1 trillion in assets right now. Public health and productivity. is a huge problem. We're going to lose 2 billion labor hours a year by the end of the century if we don't figure out how to adapt in a fast way. Our natural resources, from services that filtered water to services that store water in snow until we need it during the spring, services on the coast that protect us from storms and surges, all of those things are going to be in trouble. And so if you were to add all of that up, and there are scientists and economists who have done that, these are the folks who work at EPA from Stanford originally, by the end of the century, if we don't do anything to prepare for climate change, we're going to lose over $500 billion a year. And just so you know what that is worth, that's about the average expansion of our economy every year. So instead of having an economy that grows, we'll be paying a climate tax. So we've known for a while what the solutions are. I'm just going to be super simple and say there are only two, okay? One is we got to reduce carbon. We know that we need to do that. The other thing is that we need to get resilience. And my book is all about the resilience part. Okay, there are lots of books about the reduced carbon part. Job one is reduce carbon. Job one is also get resilient, all right? And the reason is, if you think about resilience as sort of managing climate impacts that allows communities to learn, adapt, and thrive, right? Why is that so important? Well, when I got into the climate resilience stuff about 25 years ago, I literally had people, well, a couple people at least yelling at me, and a lot of people disagreeing with me, saying that you're giving up. You want to adapt to climate change so we don't have to do anything about carbon emissions, right? And that wasn't what I was about, but I could understand the situation. Even Al Gore way back when was like, oh, if you're for climate resilience, you're lazy. That's the word he used, right? He's taken that back, okay, but that's what he said. And what he meant, right, is that, oh, you shouldn't throw in the towel. But here's the thing. Our planet is all covered with water. You know that, like 70% water, right? And it's storing about 90% of all the heat that's coming in because of human-made climate change. It's a giant hot water bottle. And that hot water bottle is going to stay hot for a long time, right? You could turn all the lights off today, and that hot water bottle would be hotter than it's supposed to be in 50 or 100 years. All right, so what are we going to do about all those people who are here for the next 50 or 100 years? They can't wait for the atmosphere to cool and for the ocean to cool. We need to do something to buy time so that we can all kind of live and thrive and adapt in a good way. Now, there are ways you can do it. You can resist. We try that. That's me way back in the background in New Orleans, enjoying the resistance, okay, and hoping it's not futile. We can adjust, and there's huge amounts of things we can adjust to. When I evacuate from hurricanes, that's the twin span I take. And it's now like 20 feet higher than it used to be when Katrina came along. And the reason is sea level rise. Department of Transportation made it that way. And then sometimes we have to retreat. There are only maybe 12, 13 communities actively thinking about retreating today because of climate change, retreating in a holistic way. All of them are indigenous communities. We're going to hear more about that in a minute too. So the first thing that I wanted to do in writing this book, which is a book addressed to the public, I'm like, this is urgent. I'm going to talk to real people. And I need to help as much as I can, along with millions of others, to try to get the word out. So I interviewed a bunch of people, right? Some people are experts, some people, everybody's an expert in something. Some were sort of recognized scientific experts, a lot of activists, a lot of people just coming up with really cool ideas. I'm not going to talk about all of them here, but you can see some of them up there. We're going to talk about a few of those folks. And I tried to focus on places that I really knew well, because I thought that if I wrote about things that I really loved and knew, that would probably be really helpful too. And one of the first places that came to me with climate change was this area on Whidbey Island in the Salish Sea, about an hour and a half from Seattle. That is not a tinted photograph. That's what the sky looked like on Labor Day some years ago because of the Labor Day fires, right? That was a time when all that soot is sort of coming in, coloring the sky. My father-in-law, who at the time was 96 years old, was not allowed to go outside for days, right? We were all like scrambling for our old COVID masks and these sorts of things. And then I remembered that a friend of mine who was a firefighter has a son who is a firefighter. His name is Sam Perkins, and he is a smoke jumper. He jumped from airplanes into the Labor Day fires, or right basically in front of them, right? And then they would try to dig and do all these kinds of things to try to keep those fires at bay. And then when he's all done, he packs up his 60-pound pack and he walks half a day to a road to get picked up, all right? So this is a life that's being affected by climate change. And he is going out into these small rural communities and making connections with people, trying to figure out how to get their livestock safe, trying to figure out how to get them safe. You might not know this, but one of the highest suicide rates of any profession is wildland firefighters. And part of it is because they don't have the support they need in their work networks. We don't have enough money in the Forest Service to help these folks. That's a law issue. Half of the budget for the U.S. Forest Service, the entire country, goes to putting out fires. All right, not to preventing fires, putting out fires, right? And so whenever we talk about, oh, let's cut the budget of an agency, right, that we don't know very much about, there it is. That's what is being cut. Now, I'm from Las Vegas, Nevada originally, third generation, okay? And here's my state. You can see, I took this map from the Centers for Disease Control's mapping system for something called social vulnerability. That's really important. The CDC made this mapping tool specifically for natural disasters. And that's because there's a lot of social science research now that shows that people and communities that are devastated by disaster are devastated by two different things. One is the geographic proximity to harm, right? And the other is the social vulnerability based on their income, their linguistic isolation, their race, their gender, their LGBTQ status, and a whole list of disability, a whole list of other kinds of things like that. So the CDC put these maps together not to show you the geographic vulnerability, but to show you the social vulnerability, which in many cases is higher. In southern Louisiana, people think of us as like a disaster area, right? I know that, okay? And you know what? We are more unusual in our social vulnerability than we are in our geographic vulnerability when you compare us to other counties or other states. So this is really important. So I just point that out. You could find your own state, you could find your own, where you grew up, you can look on this. These are vulnerability indexes. And one of the places that I looked at was Las Vegas, and I met Cynthia Moore, whom I spent a lot of time talking with. She grew up in the neighborhood that I grew up in Las Vegas, all right? And Cynthia, when I first contacted her by phone, was trying to protect her son Liam from soot in the air that was coming from wildfires in Southern California. All right. He had allergies and wasn't allowed to go outside. She was looking for an air filtration system and she couldn't afford one for him. And then she got really, really interested in air pollution issues and environmental justice air issues in her Latino community. And one of the things that she found out is, guess what? Forest fires, when a forest catches flame, it doesn't apply for a Clean Air Act permit. All right? So what that means is it blows out all the records that the Clean Air Act laws require. And what does that mean? That means that we're either going to have air that's dirtier than it's supposed to be, or we're going to have to clamp down on other emitters that do have permits. And so that's what she's been working on, is that kind of work. Now, I kept up with her for a number of years, and now she actually is the head of an environmental justice group for all of the state of Nevada. There's only one. And her big thing now is working on heat waves. Now, I grew up in Las Vegas. I grew up playing tennis in triple degrees in the summer. I didn't think anything of it because I was an idiot kid. But we didn't have triple degree summer days over and over and over again, the way that they have in Las Vegas now. And so what she was trying to do was to get the state legislature to pass a law that simply guaranteed shade, water, and rest to outdoor workers. You know, basically people working on construction, working in auto plant or auto repair places, agriculture in certain parts of Nevada, and so on. Because guess what? There are only like 4 or 5 states that guarantee those things in heat waves. And Nevada isn't one, and Arizona isn't one, and New Mexico isn't one. In Texas, it's against the law for a municipality to guarantee outdoor workers rest, shade, and water. All right? So she tried and almost got it passed and it failed. So we still don't have it, but that's another thing you can put on your law list, right? If you're thinking about, well, what's a climate law? Outside worker safety is a climate law, right? And so one of the things I'm trying to do is kind of open up the expansive ideas. Just one other thing about heat waves. You might not know this, but heat waves kill more people every year in the United States than any other kind of weather-related disaster. I mean, by like 7 or 8 times the number, okay? The people who are disproportionately affected are Black and Latino. And it is legally unclear whether the President of the United States has the authority under the Stafford Act to declare a major disaster for a heat wave. Why would that be? Because it's not listed. Why isn't it listed? Because almost everything that's listed for a potential major disaster is something in which there's a large loss of property value, right? Those buildings, they don't flood, they just get really hot and people die, right? And that's not because anybody sat down and said, oh, well, we don't care about people, but what happened is over time, we lose sight of sort of what the real issues are, right? And so to this day, the president doesn't know whether one can unlock all the kinds of money, FEMA money and the rest, for heat waves, all right? I mean, that's an ongoing debate. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. I want to stay in Joshua Tree. This is called, I'm a kid who on the Mojave Desert, and I saw Joshua trees all the time. I was in that park a million times before it was a park. And I decided I was going to go back there, and one of the reasons is a lesson, even if you don't like the desert, is a lesson in federal lands that I think is really important for people who are keeping score on legal issues. I don't know if you know Joshua trees. They're really interesting trees. They're beautiful, I think, in many ways. They've even been on a famous rock album cover. It's not the one you think. And what's interesting about these trees is that they're not going to be able to live in Joshua Tree National Park probably by the end of the century, in part because it's getting too hot for them. They actually like cold winters and cold springs, and they like to be up in higher elevations. So that is all as I'm showing you right there. Is they call these refugia, the very last places. These are climate models, imagining a 3-degree change in climate in the bottom right-hand corner. And you can see there's only a little pocket in which Joshua trees could even live anymore. All right. Now, most of that park, like most national parks, like many national parks anyway, is something we call the wilderness area. Highly protected by Congress. You can do almost no kind of human intrusion in those areas. Why wouldn't that be a good thing? Let me explain. This is what happens when fires hit Joshua Tree forests. All right. And it happens more because of alien species that are coming in and so on, all right? Now, can you prevent that? In a wilderness area, it's really hard because human beings are limited in what they can do there. So outside the wilderness area, I took this picture. They employ people to go out there with the weed whackers and cut down the invasive species and all that kind of thing. It's really hard to do that in a wilderness area. okay? When mountain lions are dying because they can't find water, there's a big debate about whether in a wilderness area you can put water troughs out there, all right? When the trees in Sequoia National Park are going up in flame because of droughts, there's a really big debate about whether you could put a watering system around them, right? And so this wonderful law, the Wilderness Act, is super fixed. It's super conservative. It doesn't want change, but change is all around it, right? So you might think, well, can't Joshua trees just move, right? Other forests do, right? Animals spread their seeds hundreds and hundreds of miles. That's what happened with Joshua trees. The only problem is the animal responsible for devouring Joshua trees in whole and then circulating their seeds around the country is dead. So that's how Joshua trees got around the first time, was these giant Shasta sloths, right? But now we don't have those anymore, and rabbits just don't move very far, right? And so we're stuck. We're stuck. And in fact, this is all just a longer story to tell you that the National Park Service in general is really stuck, because its properties have a lot more heat and a lot less rain than most other parts of the United States. And so the National Park System is on the ropes because of climate change, among other things. Well, let's get back to people for a minute. So here's a map here that shows you that social vulnerability in the state that I live in now, and you can see New Orleans down in the bottom. Let me introduce you to Sharon Levine, who is a favorite person of mine. She is amazingly talented, comes and talks to my students a lot. She's a Goldman Prize winner. That's the Nobel for global environmental activism. She's a retired special ed teacher. In her 70s, she became an internationally known climate advocate, mainly in the Cancer Alley area where all those petrochemical plants are. And she has motivated and organized people to stand up to the biggest multinational petrochemical polluters in the world, with some amazing success. I went to go visit her after Hurricane Ida. Her house lost its roof. I was in her house. We were looking at that. She was helping other people with their roofs. Then she got a text on her phone. She says, "You have to come with me." I'm like, "Where are we going?" She's like, "We're going to American Styrene, which is a plant that makes styrofoam." And so I know that when she tells me to do something, I do it. She's been on my podcast and so on. And so I went out there. There's American Styrene. There's a flare up above, which she was very concerned about because there's a lot of toxic chemicals going up into the air. And she gave me the phone and said, "Take this picture. I got to put it on Facebook." So I did. So there it is. But here's the thing. Why is this a climate resilience story? The reason those flares, those so-called accidental emissions are coming up that are deadly, and that sent some people to the hospital that weekend. The reason that happened is because they lost power. The reason they lost power is because the grid was overcome by Hurricane Ida because it wasn't resilient enough. Why doesn't American Styrene have proper generators to keep things going? Because I don't know, right? The regulations don't require it. And so we have, Louisiana has more power outages than any other state in the country, by far. And these sorts of things happen quite a bit. Just down the river is another friend of mine, Chief Sherelle Parfait Dardar. She's not a chief anymore, but she's was at the time the chief of the Grand Caillou-Duloc tribe down in southern Louisiana. And after Hurricane Ida, I was down talking with her. This is what happens to houses down there, in part because of wind, right? And down where she lives, the roads look like this, right? Almost in open water. This is a nearby area where where her husband is from and where a number of family members live, Ile de Jean Charles, which is, that's 2% of what it used to look like. And it's going underwater. There was a move and a HUD grant to try to the state got 40-something million to help the tribe create a new community and move. But the problem, the legal problem, was that this tribe is not federally recognized. So it does not have peer-to-peer relationships with the federal government. So when it applied for a grant and paid for architects and land use planners to come up with this beautiful design that won a competition at HUD, when they did all of that, they had to go through the state of Louisiana. And the state of Louisiana proposed the grant and got the money. And that's where the money went, to the state of Louisiana. And then the state said, well, we think we can make a much cheaper option, which they did. And nobody wanted to move there, very few. And the Ile de Jean Charles tribe of the Biloxi, Chitimacha, Choctaw essentially said, we're out, we're done, we're not working with you anymore. And so now we have a housing facility built by the state that other people are living in who need housing, which is great. But the tribe is still there. And we don't know what's going to happen. There are probably 8 to 9 similar situations in Alaska. And we just don't have the money, we don't have the funding, we don't have the organization, the legal agency structure to do anything about this in any kind of informed way. I told you we'd come back to oceans, and that's because I'm writing about oceans more. And there's one chapter in my book. I gave a talk at the Louisiana State University a few months ago. They made this book their freshman read. They made people read it, right? And they made people buy it. And so I had this wonderful opportunity talking to students. And I would say, okay, so like what chapter worked for you? And the chapter they liked the most was off of Key Largo. And this is a story about resistance, all right? So reefs are called sometimes barrier reefs because they create barriers and they protect from storms, right? And the reefs are in big trouble all over the world, I'm here to say. We've lost probably half of all of our coral reefs in the entire world since the Industrial Revolution. Part of it is because of climate change and heat waves in the ocean. Cara Norman I met when she was 14 years old as a middle school student in Key West. She was also a diver. She started taking diving classes from a scientist who was offering these classes as an after-school activity. Almost all girls. The girls liked science, but they didn't like the science the way it was being taught in their school. So they all learned to dive. And they learned how to dive, and then the teacher's like, okay, we're not just gonna look at fish, we're gonna do research. And so she's like the principal investigator, Cara Norman, on funded projects from NOAA right now, all right? Now she's in high school. And one of the things that she works on is coral restoration, where you grow certain kinds of fast-growing coral in offshore nurseries, and then you replant them. These are what the nurseries look like. Tens of thousands of corals growing in these nurseries. And then she plants them sort of one by one. Volunteers do this, all right? And the idea is to build back these reefs. Sometimes it can work, sometimes it can't. It's a very complicated story. And people are working on this all over the world, right? Trying to grow corals and to transplant them. There is a legal story here. And it's related to natural resources law, which is the thing we were talking about when we were in the desert just a few minutes ago, all right? Here's the legal story. It turns out it's actually really hard to grow elkhorn. Well, scientifically, practically, it's very easy to grow staghorn coral and elkhorn coral. All right, that's a staghorn right there. Okay, they grow really fast. You can pick individuals that are very robust. It's sort of like, you know, some of us have good eyesight, some of us don't. Some of us have a good ear for music, some of us don't. Some corals are pretty good with hot water and some aren't. All right, and so they're picking different kinds and they're trying to do this. It turns out it's pretty hard in the United States, logistically and legally. Why? Because elkhorn and staghorn were the first animals listed under the Endangered Species Act on account of climate change, all the way back in 2006. Now, if you didn't know coral was an animal, that's okay. Aristotle didn't either. Okay, he thought it was a rock-like plant. But at any rate, these corals now you need like several reams of paper to go through systems just to move it around. I was recently in French Polynesia working with some coral restoration groups, and they're trying to redesign the law in French Polynesia to allow for easier development of these kinds of things. I'm going to tell you just very quickly about something else going on with coral that is related to what I am going to call nature's rights. And now there's a nature's rights movement. I've talked to students who are interested in it, and I think there are lots of ways of understanding nature's rights. My way of understanding, like rights of nature, legal rights of nature, is when you treat an ecosystem, a natural ecosystem, as something besides property. And we're doing that more and more. Belize and the Yucatan Peninsula, that part of Mexico, if you've ever been to those areas, they have beaches and lots of coral and diving and snorkeling and all that kind of thing, right? That's the second largest barrier reef in the world. It's called the Mesoamerican Barrier Reef, and it's falling apart on account of climate change and on account of those storms. And so what Quintana Roo recently did in Mexico is it got together with Nature Conservancy, got together with Swiss Re, which is a reinsurance company, and they built a health insurance policy for the reef. And anytime there is a storm with certain parameters, money is paid out. It goes to the state and to other actors. They employ volunteers, or well, I guess they're not volunteers at that point. They employ scientists to dive and to build the reef back the way that Cara Norman was doing. And so it's a legal entity that is entitled to an insurance payout. And in fact, they're doing this now in the United States. Just recently, another insurance policy, this one funded by Munich Re, is now in place for Hawaiian coral reefs. This is my next book. Jonathan Adler mentioned that I'm a fellow this year at Harvard's Radcliffe Institute of Advanced Studies, and so I've been spending the year developing a new book for a popular audience with stories. And that chapter on coral got me hooked. And so I'm doing a whole book now on ocean resilience. And I couldn't be happier because one of the other fellows in my program speaks whale. He's a biologist, and he has for 35 years studied the languages of dolphins and whales. He specializes in humpback. So I've been learning so much from him, and we've been talking so much about these sorts of things. So my next book, which I'm working on, is going to have some other sort of charismatic individuals that I'm going to follow, that I have spent some time with, and including Tahlequah, the whale, who's the whale who lost her baby and then carried her baby on her rostrum for thousands of miles. What's neat about that picture, she's pregnant again. You can see it, right? And she actually had a healthy baby named Phoenix. So I'm going to be writing more about resilience, and there's a lot to say about what we can do on the oceans and so on. But the thing that I have learned talking to so many of these people, including Sylvia Earle, who's featured there, she's a marine biologist who is just an amazing activist today, is that you just have to never give up. Climate change is not a pass-fail test. Right? Just because we can't get an A doesn't mean we have to settle for an F. Right? We can get something in between. And so things sometimes look bad, and you're like, oh, I see that F. But it doesn't have to be an F, right? It can be something better than that. And so whenever I, wonder about, what should I do? I'm not feeling right about it. It doesn't make sense. I don't see the end point. I just remind myself, right, that the opposite of despair is action, right? And we can all do something. We can all do something. Think about something in your life that you care about, Maybe it's the law you practice, maybe it's gardening, maybe it's about children playing outside on the playground, maybe it's wine. Whatever it is, I guarantee climate change is affecting it. And so then what you can do is say, how can I learn more about that? And talk to other people who are interested in wine, who are interested in children, who are interested in gardening, and do something about it. Y'all don't have to go join a climate club. I mean, you can, but you don't have to. Join any club you want and ask yourself, how is climate going to affect it in some way? And move at it in that direction. And I think we can move the needle. So thank you very much.
We have a little bit of time for questions, just a couple things before we start. First, I'll call on folks, because we're video recording this, I'll just ask that you wait for the microphone before speaking so we catch the question as well. Two other little things. One, back in April 2021, we had a webinar on a very related topic that folks may be interested in on both the law and economics of climate adaptation, featuring Matthew Kahn, an economist that focuses on this, and Robin Kundis-Craig, who's a law professor that focuses on these questions. So if this has piqued your interest, that webinar video is available on the Burke Center website. Also, immediately following this program, we're having a reception upstairs. We used to hold them in the lower rotunda, but because there are classes, we now hold them upstairs. There will be books available for purchase and signing if you would like as well, but certainly please join us for the reception. I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative and ask the first question. And so we've seen some recent stories. You mentioned issues about electric power outages, yes. Concerns about transmission, but at the same time, we're adopting a lot of policies that are pushing us for climate-related concerns towards greater use of electricity, for transportation, for heating and cooling of housing. And there was a story about a report just this past week, which I don't know how reliable it is, that also suggests that, at least in transportation, the weight of vehicles is going to be radically different as we move towards electricity. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about whether or not there is some conflict between some of our mitigation policies and goals, which relate to decarbonizing and electrifying, and the resilience concern, because at least at present, it's not sure how resilient our electric power transmission and delivery systems are. So, yeah.
There's a chapter in the book on the power grid. It's actually a super interesting question, because that's exactly right. We have a grid that desperately needs to be made more resilient. The way you do it is you green it, you get more renewables on there, because wind and solar are less vulnerable to storms than natural gas and the rest. You need to smarten it, meaning more sort of electrical computer connections that can anticipate failure. And then you need to harden it, meaning that you need to protect it against many of these things. And we're not doing that. The Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Act are a down payment on building a more resilient grid, but we need to do more. And the reason we need to do more is because we are not going to be able to deliver on these other things: electric cars, electric stoves, electrifying certainly trucks and things like that. It's going to be really, really hard if we don't get more energy, electricity on that grid. The other thing that you alluded to, which is super important, is that we need the transmission lines for that kind of thing. They're talking in Louisiana, we're talking about offshore wind. I know you were talking about offshore wind in Lake Erie. Somebody's got to figure out how you get the electricity from there to the places that need it, right? And in Louisiana, at least, that's a hard story, because it's not near a lot of populated areas where you would bring that electricity on. And there's a lot of fighting around the United States on the grid, right? There's a lot of solar energy on the north part of our grid, meaning up by you, and we can't get it down in the south because there's a bottleneck in Arkansas, and nobody wants to open that bottleneck up. So yeah, so are there tensions? One tension is we're going to have a lot more demand. That's one tension. Another tension is some of the ways that you might want to generate electricity are actually not going to work so well for climate change. So just to think about it, a lot of people are saying sort of nuclear energy, right? And I'm okay with nuclear energy in certain situations. But if you have nuclear energy in an area that's going to need a lot, that doesn't have a lot of water, you're not going to be able to get water into your cooling towers. Right? And there are some kinds of solar energy that use a lot of water too. Same deal. And so we have to think about that. In Florida, they're building more pumps to get that water out of neighborhoods, which I'm in favor of, but they run electricity, those pumps. And so there are a lot of trade-offs there. And you're exactly right. We have to think about those things.
Great. So, questions for Professor Verchick? No one has any. Of course, you have to have. Folks have to have questions. Okay, right down here. Just wait for the microphone real quick.
Well, one thing I did almost by accident.
1 second. Just wait for the mic so the video will catch it.
One thing I did by accident in 1997 is I went to a real estate auction, and it was thinly attended in November, and these parcels of land were being sold by a holding company, and some people didn't bid on this land. Some of it I knew was forested, so I just put in some bids. One was $3.37, and I got 15 acres. So I just hold it as a forest. So that got me to be thinking.
All right.
There's so much we can do with just planting trees and not cutting down trees. And I have saved some trees by telling people who are just homeowners, don't cut down that tree because their landscaper wanted to cut it down. I said, you'll actually increase the value of your house if people see that tree. So I agree with you that there are things that we can do that we think are real small, but they really add up.
I agree. And you know what, this idea about scale, I think, is really important because people may know now that there are companies that are making pledges for what they say zero emissions or net zero emissions. And sometimes what that means is, they're going to put money toward preserving forests or other things that hold carbon, which I think is conceptually a good idea. What is hard about that is small owners of land, maybe like you, or certainly like small farmers, certainly in the Southeast, might be able to make money off of something like that if they had large enough land holdings, but they don't. And so I've actually been working with, there's a group out of Stanford University, a startup, which is trying to figure out how can they use cell phone technology and photography and things like that to accurately measure what the storage value of a small forest might be. And then once you know that, you can go to a market and say, look, this has been verified by scientists somewhere, and now I can sell an offset on that. So you could make, conceivably, like if this worked, you could be in a market and make money doing this.
Should I do it next week?
I'll talk to them. I'll see.
So you I talked a little bit about, or just mentioned that the communities that need to move or are looking to move are all indigenous communities.
Yeah.
And I wonder, you also had up on the screen, and I think there is a connection, saying how, the hundreds of billions of dollars it's going to cost. But when I see that, I think, well, there's probably another number of people who are going to make money out of resiliency. Not everyone's going to lose money. Some people are going to be making money out of it. And I'm thinking, there are the islands you showed where people are going to have to move. They're probably not going to move Miami Beach. They're going to build up walls and raise the streets, which they're doing, so that and pour in lots of money so that people can just stay right there who can afford to stay right there. And the people who can't afford to stay there are going to have to find someplace else to live on their own. So I just wonder if you could talk a little bit more about your comment about the communities that need to move are the indigenous communities.
It's a really big issue. Another way maybe of thinking about that is if you say, well, you got to adjust or you can retreat, how do you know which one you need to do? And often it depends on how much money you have. And So down in Louisiana, just this area I know really well, we have these monolithic levee systems that protect a lot of places, including the city of New Orleans. It doesn't protect places like where Cherelle Parfait Dardar lives. They lobbied for a levee to do that, but it was too expensive for the number of people involved. And so, there's a Highway 10 or I-10 in Louisiana, and we basically say if you're south of that interstate, you're on your own, right? And if you're north of it, you might be okay. And so already the state of Louisiana has it's mapped out areas where communities are going to have to be retired, where the services won't be provided, where the hope is that we'll have money to buy folks out. And it's, as you might imagine, a really contentious issue, because the folks in Wall Street, on Manhattan, the folks in Miami Beach, maybe the folks in Houston, they're going to have some kind of wall to protect them. And so that's a really hard social policy. The best answer I have, you haven't asked me for an answer, you were kind, but the best answer I have is we have to be really forthright about those things and transparent and let people know what the information is years and years in advance. Because some people are going to lose. They just are. But it's better if they know it, I think, early on. And it's better also if there are services available to help mitigate some of that social cost.
My question about your fellow Obama administration official, Steve Koonin, who wrote that book about Unsettled, it's called. And what he did, he went through every extreme event, sea level rise, heat waves, hurricanes, tornadoes, and in 100 pages he said they're all false, that there's a big risk there now. And the reason he shows it over and over again is cherry picking. If you just take the data that shows these extreme weather events and ignore the data that shows that there's nothing new about them. I just wondered what you thought of Steve's book.
I haven't read the book completely. The argument you describe is one I'm very skeptical of, to tell you the truth, because the data that I draw from, let's just say in the United States, is mainly from the National Climate Assessment, which is an assessment that comes out roughly every 5 years that Congress requires, 14 different federal agencies. And I've been a part of that exercise, and it is as conservative can be in the small c sense, where it's almost by consensus. And there's almost no cherry picking, because you have to have an overwhelming amount of evidence to suggest almost anything that makes it through that study.
Steve Koonin, in his analysis of the National Climate Assessment, is he says it's an outrageous violation of the scientific method. Not only do they cherry pick, they fabricate charts, and he shows it again in that book. It's an appalling misrepresentation.
Well, I'll take a look at it. Yeah, it's a very surprising allegation to me, but I'm skeptical of it for now. Mm-hmm.
Read the data.
Okay.
Another question.
Hey, Rob. So I've been interested in a phenomenon I've been hearing a little bit more about, and you sort of alluded to it when you talked about protecting New York and Miami and Houston, and that is the sort of movement of persons into more relatively safe areas. So the big move from Louisiana to Houston, for instance, after Hurricane Katrina, I mean, yes, Houston's very vulnerable, but it's less vulnerable than a lot of other places, and it's going to be protected perhaps more. I don't know if this is starting the Obama administration, but have you thought about sort of the sociological impacts of kind of that sort of movement?
Yeah, it's huge. There's a guy named Matt Hauer who's at Florida State University, a geographer, who's done some really interesting work where he's trying to figure out where people are going to move and when, right? And so he starts with a number that comes from the National Climate Assessment, which suggests that maybe 12 million people in the century are going to move on account of sea level rise alone. There's just coastal population. And so they look at Los Angeles, Miami, Houston, New Orleans, Norfolk, you can probably imagine San Francisco, some of those places. And then what he does is he says, well, where are these people going to move? And he's like, we already know, because we know where people in those cities tend to move. He went back and looked at old tax records. Okay, and what he found out is that I just named the places that are going to lose people on account of climate or on sea level rise. Maybe they get other people too, but they're going to lose some people. And the places that are going to get those people are Austin, Las Vegas, Orlando, Denver. You could probably name them as easily as I could, because they're sort of these booming interior cities, and these cities have no idea what's coming, right? And one of the issues that I take from that, I've talked to Matt about this, is we need more legal structures to have conversations with communities that are going to be losing people and communities that are going to be needing people. After Hurricane Katrina, when everyone descended on Houston and Baton Rouge, the school systems exploded, right? There was just too many people. Nobody, I mean, it was a, kind of an unexpected, well, sort of unexpected thing, but it was, nobody knew, there was no planning and so on. Most people actually are going to move within their state. And so right now, right, if I were governor of Florida, I would have Miami talking to Orlando, right? How are we going to do this? And what can the state do to prepare for this? It's going to be a 20, 30, 40-year migration. People move in the United States all the time. We are a very mobile society. 20 million or 12 million people is a lot of people. But over time, we've seen that before many times. But it works better when we plan for it.
One last question. Not that I have one, but here we go.
We're here on the Great Lakes, which is a huge water resource. And
Beautiful.
There's a lot of demand for water.
Yeah.
So I guess two parts to the question. What are the vulnerabilities or risks that our area faces? How vulnerable are the Great Lakes to some crazy idea of taking the water and diverting it? And then I don't know if you read David Pogue's book about how to survive climate change.
I have it.
One of the things he said is, people should move to Cleveland and Ontario and places like this where, it is stable. We have water. We're, 750 feet above sea level. So what are your thoughts on that?
You might be growing oranges here. I don't know. Actually, I get asked all the time, like, where should I move, right? And there's a piece in my book where I say there's almost no place that's completely safe, which is true, right? But you could go to North Dakota. North Dakota actually wants people, and they're advertising that they're a good sanctuary for climate change. The Great Lakes, when I was at the EPA, I had some interaction with some of the EPA programs that work on the Great Lakes, and there actually were vulnerabilities that were really interesting, I thought. Some of them related to the fisheries. Some of them related to the indigenous populations that rely on wild rice and other vegetation that it grows naturally in the lake, but that might not in the future. And there's quite a difference in temperature changes, as I understand it from looking at the data on the Great Lakes. So I would say, I know you have issues, as all water bodies do, with invasive species. And I think that that's something that is probably going to be a bigger issue in the future. Ice fishing might be a bigger issue. I mean, I talk about that in Minnesota and so on. But I think actually those patterns are going to change. I'll tell you another thing that I think is going to change is the polar shipping route is opening up because the ice is not occurring as it usually does. And so the money that's investing in this is thinking that the fastest way to Europe is going to be over the North Pole, and the fastest way to Asia is going to be over the North Pole. And to the extent that that connects with your shipping opportunities in the Great Lakes, that might be a good news story for you, something to think about.
Well, on that optimistic note, please join me in thanking Professor. We have a reception upstairs. If you're interested in the book, it'll be up there, but there'll be refreshments as well, so please join us upstairs. And of course, check out the website for notices of future events. But thank you all for coming.